Hello, and welcome to Pehchaan, where we unpack the stories and identities of extraordinary Pakistani Americans. I've had a little bit of a crazy morning today because I think some of you might know I'm on paternity leave. I have a second kid, and both my kids decided to throw a tantrum right before this podcast. So it's been a little bit of a wild morning. But Amreen, how are you? And how was your morning today?
I'm doing good. It's autumn here in the East Coast and it's beautiful. I was just outside waiting for the bus with my daughter and our trees are all red and yellow and really pretty. So I'm trying to stay positive, but I know what that feels like when your morning just starts with screaming. I'm sorry about that. I'm so excited today, Bilal, because I'm excited to introduce our guest. Actually, we have a really, really special person with us here today. Afia Nathaniel is a filmmaker who directed the film Dukhtar, which was the official submission from Pakistan for the Academy Awards for Best Foreign Film in the 87th year of the awards. And so we're very lucky to have someone who's such an accomplished filmmaker talk to us and discuss identity. And Bilal, you're in for a treat because Afia is a wonderful person. I've known her for a little while, and there's a lot of good topics for us to get into today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat with Afia as well because we have a Lums connection and sort of the multiple layers of Afia's identity. I'm so excited to get to know. And we also don't live that far apart, even though I've never met Afia. Like once you meet a Lums person, you feel like you know them their whole life. But now it'll be really interesting getting to know her. How are you, Afia?
Well, I'm great. Thank you for having me here, Ambreen and Bilal at Pehchaan. And I'm so happy to hear you're probably in my neighboring town, somewhere around here in New Jersey. Go New Jersey. So, and I think Ambreen, you're also around in the States. So, yeah, it's a
That's
beautiful.
right. This podcast is
Jersey
becoming
where it's
very
It
at.
is,
Jersey
right?
friendly. Yeah.
What happens in Jersey doesn't stay in Jersey.
Doesn't stay in Jersey, and it
Not
shouldn't.
anymore.
No, high time, it shouldn't. No, and I'm so happy to hear about the Lums connection. That's you now will be roped in to become part of some Lums chapter here. I can guarantee you that.
Wait till I add you to some WhatsApp groups in which it goes absolutely crazy. But for some, what I'm really curious to know is like Lums was famous for matrimony, like the amount of people who get married in your batch or across classes. So it'd be interesting to see if that carries over to the alumni groups or now probably people's second marriages, but I don't want to get into that.
That's another podcast. You should save that.
Getting
Yeah.
spicy this morning. Oh man, I'm feeling a little bit left out. I want to go to Lums too, but another life. Now, I introduced you, Afi, as a filmmaker, but that is so flat, and there's so much more to you, and you're such a dynamic person in so many ways. So there's a lot of pieces of that I want to get into, but I think I want to start kind of at the beginning, if that's okay. You grew up in Lahore. You grew up as an Air Force brat, if I can call it that,
Yeah.
and you studied computer science and mathematics, and then decided to go into this creative career. And I read in your bio, this is so interesting to me, that you worked at Publicis Pakistan
Yes.
and you started there as an intern.
Yeah.
And within a few months, you were heading up the creative department. So, what is that about? How is a mathematician, computer scientist so capable that they would go from intern to head of creative? Well, what is that? Just explain it for me.
It's a really crazy journey, Ambreen, that I've had, and I feel like I've lived several lives in this one lifetime. So one of those lives back in Pakistan, in Lahore, was growing up, as one of three girls in a very matriarchal family. And my dad, who was in the Air Force, was always getting posted around in different countries. So I grew up between several Air Force bases in Pakistan and Lahore. So I carry all of those, memories and experiences with me. And growing up in Lahore, you're always sort of being asked to choose or sort of being tracked into a certain educational track that's kind of predetermined. So since I did so well in sciences, I ended up getting tracked for math and physics And, I thought I was up for engineering until I actually went to the engineering schools in Lahore. And I said, oh my God, no, I do not want to be an engineer. And so it became a question of, just keep doing it, just keep following the path that somebody else has chosen you for you. And so I kept following this path, from convent. I graduated with a Cambridge degree in sciences. So I went into FSC at Kinnaird, did math, physics. And then I didn't want to get married. This is important, folks, because once you finish your BA, BSc, it's like, okay, job is done, sayonara, you're off to become somebody's wife. And so many of my friends were getting married, at that time, once we finished our degrees or were about to finish our undergrad degrees. And I said, reality was hitting fast. And I said, I do not want to get married. So let me buy some time for myself and let me do another degree. So from Kinnaird, I went into Lums, where they had just started their undergrad in computer sciences. And this was, I think, 94 I'm talking about. And we were the very first batch, that was taken on for computer science. We were only 23 students in that CS batch that year. There were so few of us, and we were only 3 women. And they crunched this 4-year degree into 3 years. And so we were the guinea pigs of that program. And it was brutal, like brutal in the best sense possible, because it really was a pressure cooker. And for the very first time, I saw people who loved what they did. And I found myself thinking, like, what is it that I'm doing here? Like, here are people who would love to code. They code in their dreams and their sleep in the back of a car through like 7 days and nights without food. They can still code and they love it. And what is it that I'm doing? So I'm just doing a degree, fine, I can get a good grade in it, but is that really what I want to do? So that set me on the path of some kind of introspection, like, what is it that I want to do? And I certainly did not want to be a software engineer. And I found myself thinking, okay, I have 2 undergrad degrees. What the hell have I done with my life? I'm still in Pakistan. I'm a good writer. That's all I knew. I'm a good writer and I want to do something creative. So what can I do now? So by chance, I found out about Masood Hassan, who's a very well-known columnist in the newspapers back then, and a very fantastic, advertising executive. And I knew his wife, Ira Hassan, Auntie. So I said, Auntie, can I get an interview with your husband? Can he hire me? So I literally, I showed up on this in this driveway where Masood Hassan was getting into a car, and I ran after his car. I said, hey, uncle, I just want to come in and, sort of work with you. Will you have me? And he said, you're hired. And he said, I'm just forming a new company. You want to come with me? I said, yes. And literally that same week, he set up his own company, which became Publicis Pakistan.
No way. That's such a Pakistani drama.
I know. It's like,
what it's a story. And I love this story. It's so Pakistani in so many ways. And this is how things happen.
I had no experience, but he hired me. He said, you want to write copy? Write copy for this ad. He handed me my first job. It was, for Nestle, drinking water and all that, like all of those good things were coming. I had no experience, but I had a great mentor. So he taught me the ropes. And I loved telling stories. This is what I realized while working in advertising, is my love for telling stories, even if it was for a few seconds long. I could change somebody's perception about something. I mean, that is the power of a story. And it was great training, because you learned to create something for a real audience who was going to watch it and then perhaps remember it, perhaps not, but something would stay, So, that gave me my love for really getting into media. I had no idea that I could work in the media. And my computer science background went to hell, but this new trajectory took on. And I was pretty good at making ads. So for radio, for television, and for newspapers. And in a few months, I was given the chance to become the creative head of the department. And it was so amazing. Like I wrote my own job description, which is not one you can expect in a first time job, but it was a fantastic learning.
Cool.
And
Amazing.
I credit my mentor Masood Hassan, who taught me the ropes there.
I have this in common with you because I actually did my undergrad in finance for the same reason. People told me I was good at it. This is what I should do. And then I kind of veered off into journalism. Not quite as drastic as a switch between computer science and filmmaking, but I think that I think about your childhood and what you said about growing up in Lahore. Like as a girl growing up in Lahore, you weren't allowed to play outside as much as guys were, right? So you were in the house a lot.
Yeah.
You were consuming media a lot. You were a huge Trekkie in the 80s. Is that right?
That's correct.
So I feel that some of that influenced your love of media and storytelling, but you tell me if that's kind of the seeds of, what came to be after the computer science degree when you were looking around. Was it something you always had a love for, even when you were younger?
Yeah. I mean, all roads lead back to childhood, right? I grew up as one of 3 girls, and I was raised by my grandmother, my nani, and my nani's sister, and my parnani, my great-grandmother, while my dad and mom were, parked at some Air Force base. And that was because they didn't want our education to suffer. Because in Air Force, you get posted around every 2 years or 3 years. And so they didn't want us hopping from one school to another and not getting some stability in that sense of education. In my family, it's a family of teachers. My great-grandmother was a school teacher. My nani was a school teacher. My dadi was a school teacher. My mom was a professor. So, I come from a family that really valued this idea that no matter what, children, and especially girls, should have the very best of the education that can be afforded to them. And so even though we were very, a modest, humble, middle-class family, a non-Muslim, a minority family in a very matriarchal setup, education was always given that deepest respect for the children. And so convent was our schooling. So convent was a Catholic school, and it was the best private school. And so it was important for my family also to sort of honor our Christian heritage, and to be in a schooling system where we could learn about our own religion and sort of have the liberty of and a space to call our own in a Muslim majority, system. So growing up, like in that very little bubble, I like to call it, of a small middle class family, where there's no sons, there's no man in the house, you're not allowed to go out, you're really on your own, and it's a very unusual kind of upbringing in a very patriarchal setup, all around us. So all around us, we were surrounded by Muslim families. We were the one Christian family and only women in the house.
Yeah.
So you grew up sort of trying to be invisible in some ways, to not call attention on yourself as women and as minorities also. So it was a very sheltered upbringing. You couldn't even step out of the house. I mean, for those of us who've grown up in Lahore, knowing what, how sheltered backgrounds can be. So stepping out of the house was a big thing if you were a guy. If you were a boy, you could go out, play cricket with your friends, or, hang out, go to the shops, whatever. Like, you could go get bread and things like that. But as girls, we could never even do chores outside the house. It was not safe. It was not safe to be go unchaperoned or without a man or without a brother or a cousin, So it was a very in some ways an isolated childhood, and I found refuge, I guess, in books, because we come from a family of educators. There was always books. There was always fiction, nonfiction. Everything was lying around the house, and my mom used to like buy us these truckloads of books for birthdays. So I grew up being this bookworm, this nerd who could sort of check out of the world outside and dive into the world inside and discover a whole other planet. And so through books, through, we used to have, growing up in the 80s, we used to have this one state controlled channel, PTV. And we used to wait eagerly for it to, like come up online. And we used to religiously watch the 8 p.m. dramas. So grew up faithfully on Tanhaiya and Hasina Moin's plays and dramas. And also because we were in Lahore, we used to watch and be able to watch, the Indian shows and the Indian Chitrahar. Um, so because you're on the border, right? Lahore is on the border, very close to India. So you could get these, if you moved your antenna in the right direction, you could get the Indian channels. So, if when the wind would blow, the storm would come, you would lose the Indian connection. You had to go back and fix your antennas. So anyway, so we grew up hungry for the world outside. And I think this kind of impetus or this kind of instinct had its roots while I was growing up in Lahore, and it kind of blossomed from there in a very unconscious way. I guess, we never, at least that's how I feel like, I can't think of a moment where I said, oh, I want to be a filmmaker. It was not a conscious decision. It was a series of these unconscious experiences that finally led to this realization that there is a world of stories brimming inside of me that are dying to come out, right? And so watching a show like, let's say, Star Trek, I absolutely love that show because it showed you the possibility of the impossible. What if you could travel space and go out and discover new worlds? And that felt like the spirit that I was in, like, the spirit of discovery. And so I latched on to this spirit of discovery and joy when it came to the written word or the moving image. And that only grew and mushroomed, once I started working in advertising and could find a way finally to channel all that was buried inside.
That's such a beautiful journey and story. And we're going to come to sort of your later life and the work that you're doing today. But to go from a state-run television and that consuming that, like the one channel that was sort of available, and to get inspired to go on the journey that you have and the rooms that you're in today, it's inspiring just to sort of hear that story. But I want to come back to another thread in your life that we share, which is Lums. And you talked about how, the computer science degree is something you no longer use.
Yeah.
But you talked about, the bubble that you were in or the isolation that you were in as a child. I want to ask if Lums broke that bubble or put you in a different bubble as you sort of got out of that, as you literally and metaphorically got out of your home to sort of be at Lums. And also, if I understand this correctly, I think you were the first female Christian at Lums.
Yeah.
And I want to learn a little bit about, what your identity or expressing that identity, and were you even sort of, comfortable being public about that when you were at Lums? So talk to us a little bit about what Lums was like for you at that moment. And being a Luminite, I just feel like you're such a trailblazer at so many different levels there. Like being a female in in computer science, like at the time that you were there, like it's mind-blowing, like to think about that. Even my computer science class was a bunch of dudes, and I was there like at the beginning I started as a computer science major, and I'm like, this is too much, like I can't do it. The fact that you stuck with it and did it also shows like the kind of human being you are. But talk to us about your Lums story.
Lums was a great adventure for me, and there's no learning that goes missing in some ways, right? So even though I joke about computer science, like ditching it completely, I feel that a very big part of my life was shaped by the journey at Lums. There was a lot of discipline. There was um, a kind of work ethic, and I found my work ethic there. Uh, and another thing, to be able to work under pressure and deliver, uh, that's something that really prepares you for the real world, in some ways. So moving from one bubble to another bubble, that's an interesting way to look at it, because Lahore is like that. I think Lahore is this teeny tiny place with these small bubbles, and you grow up in these intersecting bubbles until you actually leave the country. So while I was still in Pakistan with no ambition to leave the country, I had no idea that I was in a bubble. I was very secure in this middle class trajectory, with the knowledge that, okay, computer science is the new thing, and I'm pretty good at it. I can hash out Java programming in my sleep and build you an app. Um, and so, but in terms of what it taught me was to really embrace the hard work. And the other thing that it really showed me, going back to your question of identities, is I had never really thought about myself as a minority, because I had always learned to kind of not wear my identity on a sleeve, so to speak. As non-Muslims, you tend to hide. And growing up in the 80s, when the Islamization happened of Pakistan, you tended to hide your identity as much as possible so as to blend in and not stand out and not be considered the other. And so when I came to Lums, this is a story, I'll share with you. It's the very first day at Lums. We walk into this beautiful, massive new building, and they welcome us. There's a cake cutting ceremony, and then we walk out. And as I'm walking this new space, this gorgeous new campus, I bump into this guy, this cleaning guy who works at Lums, and he looks at me and he smiles and he stops me, and he said to me कि बेटा हम बहुत खुश हैं कि आप यहाँ आई हैं Lums में, हमारी पूरी community बहुत खुश है. And let me translate that. So this is a Christian sweeper at Lums who stops me and tells me and congratulates me and tells me that the Christian community in Lums, is so proud that you have come in as the first Christian student. And that night I went home and I cried. I really cried. I didn't realize, because our community is called Chura. In Pakistan, we are referred to in a very derogatory way, which means the sweepers. So at the time of partition, a lot of the non-Muslims who could flee fled, but those who stayed, they were from very humble backgrounds. So a lot of the Hindus and the Christians who stayed back come from very, very marginalized and backward segments of the society. There's no upward mobility in Pakistan. So when I was in Lums that day, and I finally realized, I represent my community, which is called the sweepers community, and today I have stepped into the highest echelon of education, and I represent them. To me, that felt it was an extraordinary privilege. I realized that day that I have, and an extraordinary responsibility to represent, and it truly made me embrace, and it truly made me not be ashamed to embrace that part of my identity and to acknowledge it in that space. So I think at Lums, it allowed me to sort of take charge of that identity and start thinking about what can I do with this extraordinary privilege I have to be part of this educational system and to be part of, a generation that can move forward and move beyond the roles that have been carved out or predetermined, and to break out and to really discover. We have that opportunity to discover and to trailblaze if we want to. And I feel very thankful to have had that moment and that realization. But in Pakistan, you sort of tend to be very you downplay your own identity in that sense. So I came to terms with it, but I never really fully went out with it. All my friends knew me as non-Muslims and very, very supportive, deeply supportive of all of that. But all around me, I could see that there is a level, there is a dichotomy in terms of, the rights or the understanding of what it means to be a non-Muslim growing up in Pakistan, and what kinds of rights you have or don't have. So it was a very tough discovery as I grew older and away from this bubble of childhood into adulthood, to really reckon with what it means to be not a fully first-class citizen of the country.
That's such an incredible story. I feel very emotional right now just hearing it, and I can only imagine what it felt like in the moment, Afia. But it makes me reflect on how often you don't even realize that you are paving the path for others, or that you are a role model for others, or inspiring other people. You're just going about kind of your life and trying to find your way. And that's actually a thread that's continued in your career. You've continued to trailblaze, as a female, as a Pakistani filmmaker. You have blazed trails for so many people and in so many ways. Even today, very small percentage of directors of big time films are women, let alone, I guess none of them are South Asian women. And in America, we see so many now emerging voices from our communities, but they're largely men, right? So there aren't that many female voices even today. So I wonder if we could talk a bit about the thought and this moment that you had in your career, kind of a very surreal, I imagine, from the incredible success that this film had. And I also want to talk about what the film's content is about, because I think it very much is informed by this childhood that you're talking to us about now, this entrenched patriarchy in Lahore, and kind of having to confront that and living in a house of matriarchs, or really kind of standing apart from it, right? And having to confront it. Dokhtar is this film, you call it a road trip thriller, but I think it's so much more than that. And I got to see it at the Seattle Film Festival. I think you were there, actually. That's the first time we encountered one another. And then our paths crossed again in New Jersey. But it's a story about a mother trying to rescue her child who's going to be married off, and child bride. And it's got this very strong political message, but the movie is truly a thriller. It's fun to watch. It's high paced. It's trying to get away from the bad guys. Kind of, it's got that feel to it, which is also a bit of a genre breaking kind of move for a woman filmmaker. And it was shown in over 20 countries. It was the best feature film at the South Asian International Film Festival. It won, a lot of recognition. Must have been a really big moment for you. And I wanted you to kind of talk about that a little bit. But also, I just want to say, what a trail you've blazed for other women who are, Desi, who don't see themselves represented in that kind of spaces. Do you ever feel like there's a burden that comes with being a trailblazer? And what do you feel about, is there a responsibility that you feel about that? Or is that just sort of, the side effect of being who you are?
So that's thank you for those thoughts, Ambreen. And there's a lot of things there in your question. So let me try and parse that out. Going back to film and the love for telling stories, Dukhtar was inspired by a true story that I had heard when I was working for the nonprofit YWCA. This is after my stint in advertising. I left advertising to go to Europe. I worked with an NGO there in Europe, and while working with this international women's nonprofit, I realized the power of women's stories and the truth, that tends to hide, because women's courage is often dismissed as, oh, well, it's just another woman's story. And I realized, how these stories can shape and influence another generation with the stories of this courage, and like sharing this with the world would open up possibilities for it to be heard and seen outside of this one little bubble, so to speak. So when I heard the story of this mother who was from the tribal areas of Pakistan, her actual story was much different. She ran away from her village with her 2 young daughters, and her story of survival was spread over many years. But what stayed with me was this image of this woman, a child, and the mountains. And from this seed image grew the story of a mother on the run. And there's a truck driver who becomes a main character who helps the mother and the child. And the film for me was a love letter to Pakistan, because I was here in the US at that time when I was writing it. I was in a film school by that time. And I was really missing home. I was missing Pakistan. And for me, writing this film was a way to connect with Pakistan. And because the film is a road trip, it's a thriller, I found myself writing the places that I grew up in. A big part of it is Lahore. I also grew up in Air Force bases. So I sprinkled those locations. And so it was a very organic way of kind of crafting this love letter to my country that was going to have a social justice issue at its core, which was going to be child marriage. I've always felt very strongly about this issue, and especially because I became a mom and as part of the journey of Dukhtar, and that really strengthened my intention of making this film for my children, for my daughters, and for other children, and for other people around the world. And so it was like a 10-year journey in terms of writing, finding the money, and shooting this in Pakistan. So the entire film is 100% shot in Pakistan. And I was the only female crew member with 40 male crew members. We went on this crazy 2-month road trip in the northern areas of Pakistan all the way, and made our way down to Lahore, and filmed in very difficult terrain, in difficult weather. But it was a gorgeous, gorgeous experience, because there's such a freedom to tell stories in Pakistan. I know we're not used to hearing that part, but let me just say it. I was never once stopped by anyone or told you cannot film, or don't do this film. Everybody who came with me on this journey supported the message of the film, especially I want to give a shout out to my producing partner, Muhammad Khalid Ali. He was the first one to believe and the first one to say, Afia ji, hum ye karenge. Even if all the naysayers in the world come and tell us not to do this film, we'll do this. And so with that energy, we all went out, made this film in almost impossible conditions. But it was, when the film came out, I did not expect it to do so well. Honestly, I was very nervous. I was very apprehensive. But when the film first premiered at Toronto and got the standing ovation, we had sold out screenings. For me, and there was Pakistanis, like the diaspora came, embraced this in Toronto. There were long rush lines outside, and people told us that for first-time filmmakers, this is not usual, like this kind of frenzy. So, the film really spoke to Pakistanis, both in the country and outside the country. And for me, that was very, like, I was so thankful and filled with gratitude with the way audiences embraced it. Because, the film has a tough message. And the thing that we saw in Pakistan was that women, especially older women, younger women, they embraced the film's message and brought their families. So when a nani or a dadi would want to go and see a film, she would be like, "Beta, mujhe dukhtar dekhni hai, aao chalte hain." So she would bring, like, her whole tappar, the sisters, the brothers, the children, the grandchildren. And that was a new kind of audience in Pakistan. This is not the audience that is going to go and watch a matka and a jhatka film. There's no item number in the film. There's no sensationalism. There's nothing. It's just a story of a mother and a child, and this gorgeous landscape, and perhaps a kind of hope that that remains to be seen, as part of their lives. And so people really latched on to this idea of hope, which for me is very important, because you can't just sort of hit the audience on the head with a social justice issue. You have to, like, mold and craft that, and in a way where it's a story that they can take and think about, right? So when the audience has left the theater, and if the story stays with them, or if the message or something stays with them, then I have done my job. That is how I think of it. So for me, filmmaking and activism is kind of, it goes hand in glove, but in a very unconscious way. I want it to be experienced. And then, with the success in Pakistan and its success outside was also very tremendous. So, the film in the US, it became the Critics' Pick by Village Voice. This is the first time a Pakistani art house film has ever done so well, in the US, back in 2014 and 15, and so audiences outside of Pakistan were also responding to this film. It's a very universal theme, and so this idea of telling the story and bringing in new audiences and sort of letting this film take its own life, that's what we do. Once I've done my job, which is to make the film, it's like this film now has to live its own life and find its own path. I've done my job. And it was very gratifying to see that audiences outside of Pakistan who were also hungry to see films from our country, and they really, they really responded to this idea of a road trip thriller. Because usually when you think of thrillers, this idea of the hunter and the hunted, you think of big Bollywood, Hollywood, Bollywood blockbusters. But here's a quiet little story that is in between the genres of a thriller. And, it's art house, but it also has a commercial, kind of aspect to it. And so it can straddle different kinds of audiences. And that was something new for a Pakistani film to kind of uncover and discover, and find its path outside. So I'm very, very thankful to my team, my entire crew and cast who are part of this journey, and to all our audiences who even to this day, it's been 9 years, I still get emails from fans, they ask me, "Are you making the sequel to Dukhtar?
Yeah.
Please make I said, no. The sequel, what's in your brain, what's in your mind, that is the sequel. You write the sequel. I'm not doing that." So yeah.
I think there's kind of two threads here. One is about the movie itself, and then the other is about the experience in your life of having this thing you created become incredibly successful. And overnight, it feels like you are a sensation and you're being written about in all the great magazines, and, critics everywhere are lauding this thing you've created. And that must have been such a moment, right?
Yeah.
Such a moment of validation, such a moment of, oh my gosh, I've made it. What did that feel like for you?
It was a beautiful feeling, and then reality hit like a ton of bricks, which is that nobody's really hiring Pakistani American brown women as directors in the US. This is back, I'm talking about 2014 and 15, um, because very often what we see is, in art house, independent filmmaking, a lot of male directors were able to make the leap from their indie films into the industry. But I was getting no such luck. And the problem is really foreign language. So in the US, filmmakers like myself get boxed into this little niche called foreign language filmmaker, where you're considered the other. And because your first film is not English language or in any colonial language, you're given this little sandbox to remain in that sandbox. And so it was very, very tough for me. And this is reality. It's not glamorous, Ambreen, I'll tell you that. So despite all the accolades, the critical acclaim of Dukhtar and everything, in 2015, by the end of it, I was exhausted. Trying to find work, trying to put food on the table for my family, and it wasn't happening. So I actually, in some ways, left the industry after the success of Dukhtar, because the reality was very harsh back then. So I went into academia. I started teaching students screenwriting, directing. So I still did something, that informed the thing that I loved. I could share it with my students, but I was really longing to go back to the industry. And so last year was a real break for me. It's almost been 10 years since I made Dukhtar, but I got my real breakthrough last year when I directed television in the US, in Chicago Med, through the NBC Female Forward Initiative. And they really provided me with this opportunity to make this bridge from filmmaking, like feature filmmaking, into television, which is so exciting, when you think about what's happening in television. Like, all the most original and exciting work is actually happening in television. So I feel very excited to now have made that bridge into television and to direct in television, which is so gratifying. And it kind of, it has opened up doors in an amazing way. So I feel like, I may have felt very disheartened in 2015, but I feel very grateful to, in some ways, have resurrected my career and plugged myself back into the matrix, so to speak. So it's come a full circle. It really has. And Dukhtar has really opened up doors for me in ways that I couldn't have imagined, as a South Asian filmmaker now. So I feel between 2014 and 2023, there's been a seismic change in the industry when it comes to representation, when it comes to issues of minorities and finding representation and authenticity, and for authenticity to be valued. So our stories have a greater leverage now, have a greater audience, and the numbers are speaking for themselves in streaming, So I feel like we are now poised at the precipice of a tsunami of change when it comes to stories of brown, especially brown female, filmmakers and artists. There is a platform, there is an opportunity, and it's time to kind of, ride that momentum and be part of that change.
So this is a beautiful segue into the next question that I want to ask, which is actually how your identity influences your work. And I want to pick on a few threads that you said, which I find fascinating. You said you started writing Dukhtar because you were missing home. You were missing Pakistan, so you were referring to Pakistan as home.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming at some point, America became home. So you had a new definition of home, and you can tell me if this is true or not true, because I've struggled with the definition of home.
Yeah.
But I imagine when you know, as an immigrant, you still feel like an outsider, but for you, it's sort of a double take because you don't fit the typical definition of what a Pakistani would be. So, for example, you know, you come from a minority within that. So in the U.S. also, like not just being Pakistani, but being Pakistani Christian to the extent that you identify with that, you know, there's an outsider sort of perspective to it. And I actually see it reflected in your art as well. And I want you to tell me if I'm projecting or if this is real.
Mhm.
But the fact that you made a film that fit in no box in which Pakistani films were created, that there were no item numbers, there was not a boy-girl love story,
Yeah.
the fact that you defied what a Pakistani audience was used to consuming and created something of your own is, I think, a reflection of the fact that you didn't fit boxes, you know, in your identity as well. The other thing that I find interesting is you said, you know, when Duftar came out, it was actually the women in Pakistan, the nannies, who dragged, you know, their entire families to say, hey, this is the film that I want to watch. And I feel like it's an echo to your matriarchal sort of bring up where you knew that the women hold the keys to what the rest of the family could do. And your storytelling sort of reflected that and attracted that kind of audience and brought an audience to film who would otherwise stay at home. So I'm projecting a lot onto you and your identity, but I want to hear it now from your side. You know, how much do you think your, you know, the fact that you were a trailblazer, the fact that you didn't fit into boxes enables you to produce art that doesn't fit into boxes and then sort of ride this momentum or this moment in America where, you know, your identity and the authentic expression of that identity is finally beginning to get momentum?
Mhm. I think the idea of home is always powerful. You know, where is home? What does it mean to you? And I guess, again, you know, in a very subconscious way, I've been exploring that in my work. So, Dukhtar, in some ways, is that transition point of, okay, I'm here in the US writing about home, which is Pakistan. And now it's been almost 20 years I've been in the US, and now this is home too. And, you know, what are the stories that are brewing in this part of the world for me that are still a bridge to what is my home? And I haven't fully answered that for myself. When I'm here, home is Pakistan. When I'm in Pakistan, home is US. So I'm
our lives up.
right. So always in between that, and I think that's really exciting because it keeps things fresh. You know, the perspective is always fresh. I don't feel jaded. You know, when I go back to Pakistan, it takes me some time to settle down and, you know, go back into the groove of things. There's a different rhythm, right, of things. And then when I'm in Pakistan, I'm like totally like I'm by week one, and at the end of week one, I'm completely in my Pakistani zone, right? When I'm back in the US, it takes me another few days to settle back in my American skin. And so, you know, what does that mean for my work? What it means is I have a greater latitude in terms of stories that I am now exploring. So I'm currently working on a couple of projects that, at least one of them I can share with you right now. It's kind of mining this idea of identity, and it's a project called Watched, which is based on a novel by Marina Budhos. And the story is set in New York City right after 9/11. And it's a story of a Muslim teenager who is roped into by the authorities to become a snitch, you know, post 9/11. And so the story really dives into a community that is considered the other, right? So our identity, we're always, you know, like there's always, no matter what part of the world you go in, at some point you will be the other. So when I'm here, yes, I am the other, and within that I might be yet another and another. But what does it really mean eventually for the work is that it gives me an opportunity to be able to parse all these different identities and kind of unmask it for our audiences here. So this particular story, Watched, I'm developing that into a television show. It's set in a time, it's set in a place where we have not really experienced the story of the Muslim community through their own lens, through the lens of the other. So the lens is no longer the other, and that is important. In my work, I flip that. So I will force you to experience it from the inside out. And so identity has these layers, and we unpack them in different ways. So in this particular TV show, what does it mean for young people, young Muslims growing up in a very polarized time? What does it mean to be an American? That is at the heart of the story. And there's all kinds of, you're torn in all different kinds of direction: family, identity, ethnicity, language. And so this show really dives into all those aspects of our identity and tries to give you the stories behind those identities. And I feel it's an exciting time to explore that and own that. Exploring is one thing, but owning our stories and telling them in the way we want to tell them and not be afraid of it, that kind of fearlessness I find I am embracing now in my work. Age might have to do with it, but I find I am no longer worried about what people might think or what the buyer might think or who will finance this. Yes, we think about, strategically who will finance this, but that doesn't drive the way I will tell the story or how I will approach the story or the character. I will speak to my authenticity in the way it is, and I will present it to the world. And so I guess, coming back to what you were saying, in terms of not checking any boxes, like I feel if you think about the boxes, you'll never fit in because you're not telling a story to please everybody. If you did that, there's no point to it. That's not the kind of stories I want to tell. So you tell the story that you want to tell and don't worry about the boxes. We'll come up with the boxes. Somebody will come up. That's the job of the critics. They love coming up with labels and boxes. They'll come up with
right. Yeah.
My job is to not worry about that.
I love that thought because I sort of did that to you in the intro when you have to put somebody in a box to describe them, right? But you're right that I struggled with that too. I was like, you can't put people in boxes because they're so unique. And I as you're talking about this sort of emboldened nature that you now have, you don't care about the financiers, you're going to force people to see it the way you want them to see it. The question that comes to my mind is, where did that bravery come from? From 2014 to now. And I don't want to downplay that decade because you are an incredible teacher and you've been teaching the art of filmmaking this whole time. And as you said, teaching is a part of your family legacy in a way. It's kind of what, other people in the family have also done. So teaching is a huge deal. And I know you've made a lot of grounds in that regard, in that career, in the time that you have stepped away from film. But you return to it and you return to it with a sense of mission, it feels like, a sense of even more strength. Like, I'm going to do this, even if people try to fight me on it and they don't let me, I'm going to make them. Yeah. So where did that come from? Is it society and the circumstances that have changed? Is it you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been almost 10 years, so I have changed. My worldview has changed. And I guess the experiences that have shaped me in this past few years, they have changed me. I'm a mom to a teenager. That's one thing. That certainly changes you. Your children change you, right? And you find that the things that you do for them more and more. And somehow that has become part of my life. The other thing that has changed is last year I got some bad news, which was that I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was an early stage. Thankfully, it was caught early on, and I went through a whole process of healing. I'm still going through that process of healing. But what that has done to me is there's a pause button in life, and I felt like it put, my finger was pushed. There's a pause button in my life, and it forced me to reflect in a very deep way. Like, what is it that I want to do? What is it that I want to say anymore? So I left last year when I found myself reflecting. I found myself going back to this thing that I love, which is telling stories. And so I said, okay, I'm going to leave teaching. I have given many years of myself to others. I will now find a way to come back to this thing that I love and do it in a way where, because I know there's an urgency inside me now, and there's a kind of fearlessness I did not have before. So it's like, a fuck you kind of like, I will do what I want because I have no more fear. This disease has taught me to not be afraid and to really take on the challenge graciously, fearlessly, and with urgency. And that is how I swing these days.
Wow. Urgency. I feel like that's a big piece of that because we take our existence for granted. We feel like we'll get to it one day.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing we can take for granted, So living in the now, in the present, being thankful, being grateful, and being fearless, like this is all, there is for now that I feel I can tap into and come back to the industry. So it feels like a great time. I mean, the union strikes are done with, changes in the air, and there's new possibilities that have emerged in the industry. It feels like a great time to come back renewed and rejuvenated. That's also important. If you don't feel refreshed, rejuvenated as an artist from within, then very soon your voice is stale. Your ideas become old, they're stale. So finding a way to refresh yourself, to rejuvenate, and to embrace that in a positive spirit, and to work with good people,
Yeah.
that's the way forward.
I want to thank you for sharing that. First of all, we're grateful that you shared this story with us. I want to you talked about being fearless. You talked about the sense of urgency and the impact that has on sort of the work and the kind of art that you can now create or the stories that you can tell. I also want to ask about the impact of that on understanding your own identity or understanding yourself. Does it have an impact when you get a diagnosis like that? All these questions that you've had about identity that have been a thread through your life. Does everything suddenly become clear, or is it still as confusing to know who you really are when you go through a moment like that?
I think it's a very powerful moment, and I'm still unpacking it in terms of identity, what it means, because as I just shared with you in this podcast, it's the very first time that I have actually come out, openly about my minority background from Pakistan. I have shed that skin of being afraid to speak up and speak about, of who I am, where I come from, and where I'm going. So, in some ways, these questions never leave you, and you keep unpacking them throughout your life. But I feel I'm at that point where I fully embrace all those different layers, of my identity that have to do with religion, that have to do with ethnicity, that have to do with my present American identity and where I am on the East Coast and so on, So within that, there is all these different layers that kind of come to the surface and are ready for being nudged and shaped into something.
Yeah.
So I feel very alive and plugged into myself at this moment to unpack all of that and not be afraid. I have several other films and projects that I'm working on, and each of those projects gives me an opportunity to tap a part of me that may have been buried. in some capacity.
Yeah.
So a lot of introspection goes on, right? As an artist, you're always thinking of what is it about this material or this story or this character. You invest some part of you in that story or that character, right? And so for me, I'm doing that in a way where I pay homage to the multi layers of the religion and so on. So I'm currently working on a story that has to do with Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and Christians. And I find that I can easily tap into all of my experiences growing up and having an Indian husband, who's from a Hindu family, So I come from this very interesting background where I have Christian, Muslim, and Hindu like spread out all over India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. I'm Gujju and Pehchaan and this and that. Like, all of these identities have now become ready for exploration. And it's really fun kind of diving into that and discovering a hidden layer of your own self through it.
And a power.
A power.
Because,
yeah.
Right? I think when you get to the point where you say, I'm not going to hide this, I'm not going to be ashamed.
Yes.
Then you unlock something inside yourself. You become very strong.
Yeah.
And then you can actually do it because you have the strength for it, I think.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah. And this identity that you're describing that has so many different facets and pieces to it, this is what being Desi is about.
Yes.
I feel like we've lost this because we've started to live in silos and boxes and you're Pakistani and I'm Indian, and I'm Sikh and we've forgotten that we were just one big open land of people that were moving around and interacting. It's such a loss, I think, in this moment that the South Asian community can't see how similar we are in the challenges that we face and the backgrounds that we come from. I don't want to be on my soapbox too long, but I feel like you sort of embody something that we've forgotten, which is that we have so much going on. It's not just that there are layers because you're Pakistani and American. It's that being Pakistani or South Asian is in itself a very layered identity.
Right.
Being a Muslim in South Asia is very layered. You have connections to places beyond the subcontinent, but also you have your roots there, right?
Yeah.
So...
And I think
on that note, I wonder if I can ask you, since you mentioned your husband is Indian, just sort of how much do the politics of South Asia right now kind of affect you as an expat living in America? Do you think about that? Is it, sometimes I'm so disheartened by the news that I hear about, the treatment of minorities in South Asia, especially in India. And I just wonder if you want to comment on that.
I think, the whole world is feeling this polarization in different ways. Every country is feeling that pinch of polarization. And it certainly is, it's a very sad thing to see it happening in a bigger and bigger way in our countries, I feel. And I think the headlines that come out of both India and Pakistan, they make me sad. My husband and I, we sometimes don't look at our local news, even though, in the morning when I check New York Times, I check my Hollywood Trade Report. I also check Dawn, our local newspaper in Pakistan. And I want to stay plugged in because I feel like the diaspora has a way of looking from the outside in. That's true. But it also gives us an objectivity that and a kind of a voice of reason in this in this foray of voices that is important. And so I feel like in our household, when we talk about India and Pakistan, we settle everything in the kitchen. That's where I cook. So it's all equal. It's all good. We no matter what we might disagree on, the food brings us together, and we can solve any peace issue over a good meal. I feel if we let ourselves, we could do that. So I feel very in our household, it's pretty chill.
I love that. It's always the food.
But cricket. Right now, my husband's watching cricket. He was cheering for the Pakistani team to get into the finals, but we never made it, right? So He's Indian, but he was cheering for the team. He was like, "Come on, Pakistan!"
Was he doing that just so that India could beat Pakistan?
Yes.
That's not really
Look,
supporting Pakistan.
no. Listen. We were all cheering for, I was cheering for Afghanistan as well. At some point, I was like, "Come on, Afghanistan, you got to get in there too." So,
Yeah.
it's a mixed bag when it comes to politics. I am not a very political person, but I feel like what I want to say about politics, life, and everything, it's there in my work. And so I, I find that that's my way of expressing best what I want to say about it. And I feel like that's the more organic way. And in our house, it's like, all right, let's enjoy this film together. And I just watch everything that I can with my husband.
I want to take this to sort of the next generation of you, Afia. This is going to be sort of my last substantive question, but you're like an onion, like you peel layers of your identity, and instead of it sort of weighing on you or bringing you down, you've actually sort of channeled that into your art, into your storytelling, and sort of elevated all of us, sort of learning through your storytelling and through your experiences. But how does that translate into your parenting? Because that is very, very personal. And, when you think about identity, for me, identity was a hypothetical question, like, is America home or Pakistan home? Until I had my daughter. And then I was like, oh, now this is a practical question. We were talking before we went live, about how I just want to get out of the diaper stage. And then, your daughter is at a different life stage where I think these identity questions become even more real. So talk to me a little bit about how everything that's happened in your life influences how you parent when it comes to identity and helping your children think about their identity.
Gosh, that's a difficult question, Bilal. Parenting. I feel
on a light note.
Bilal's fishing for advice.
You live, you learn, right? So I have a 16-year-old right now. She's in grade 11 and getting ready for college next year. So my parenting is done, Bilal. I am done. All before that, yes, I was parenting. And, I'm very happy to say we've raised a wonderful, conscientious human being who is very American, but deeply in touch with her South Asian roots. And what we found was very interesting in terms of connecting her to her roots was watching Bollywood films together. Like, she actually watches some of the films with us. And so while she was growing up, that was part of our thing as a family. We would sit down, we would watch something from home. She has actually watched Humsafar, a Pakistani TV drama with me on her own. And she learned Urdu, like she learned some, she picked up some really good phrases, from those TV dramas. So language, language is one way of bringing our child into the fold of where we're from and what's our identity, and sort of celebrating that in a cultural way. And making it feel not like, oh, it's this other thing. It is the thing, and for it to not be, for them to not be ashamed, like it has to come from them, right? From the kids. And I find that we have the privilege of being in a fantastic public school that really values diversity. So for us, it was important as a parent to find out, where should we settle or put down our roots? Where should we call home so that our child would grow up in a way where they feel they belong right there? And so growing up in this extremely diverse community here in New Jersey and going to a public school that values all of that, it's been a wonderful experience, what that means. And it's made my parenting job easier. Honestly, I don't have to deal with the anxiety of this. At least I feel our children's generation has a better chance of kind of wrangling with this on their own, because there is so much around them that does celebrate who they are now,
Yeah.
you know, versus the generation like Ambreen, your generation, and any other of our age who grew up here, their issues or their challenges were very, very different than the one
Yeah.
that's growing up now. So it feels like, those barriers to identity in some way, this new generation, they are growing up so comfortable in their skin that I feel like they are the ones, who can change this world for the better. If there's anyone who can change polarization, it's this new generation, our children, who can do it, because we've made a mess
I'm
of it for sure. Like
yeah.
we the
I'm so
planet
happy
is
to hear
gone
you say
too.
that
Yeah, but our
because
children, I think
yeah.
they really are the hope.
I mean, you have a window into that because she's 16, so she's almost an adult. You can see the kind of person she's become. And I
Yes,
think
yes.
for Bilal and I, we have younger kids. You hope that you're
Yeah.
sending the right messages, that they're getting it, that, they're going to become these wonderful people that are capable of that.
Yes.
But you never know. And I think you're right. Growing up in America was very different for me in the 90s than it is now.
Mhm.
And I always wonder, like, is that an advantage? Is that going to improve things or not? And I think sometimes I feel hopeful and other times I feel quite cynical. And I feel like there's just kind of entrenched racism in America that, the documentarian Ken Burns, he once said that slavery is like the original sin of America. So this idea that like it's so embedded in the society that it can't change. And I think in these moments of polarization, sometimes it feels like that to me. It's like, okay, no, Muslims will never be accepted here. Okay, Desis will never, like
Yeah.
I get kind of caught up in that. But the one thing that is also different about society today, it's not just the diversity, which is incredible, but also you described in Lahore being trapped in your house. And in a way, my childhood in California was very similar because I had Punjabi parents. So they were like, no, you stay in the house. You don't go to the mall with your friends. You don't see your friends. So I was also pretty much at home consuming TV and whatever was on TV. But today, we have such an opportunity to connect with Pakistanis, Indians, in real time. Kids are on TikTok and Instagram. They're getting that content into their phones, like in their hands. And it's just this dialogue, this international dialogue is possible that wasn't when you were adjusting your antenna because you're trying to get the Indian channels, right?
Absolutely.
So that's incredible too, just sort of the conversation we're all able to have with one another. And that goes to your point about what the diaspora can do about South Asian politics in South Asia too. We can communicate with them through our creations, whether that's art or something else. We can tell them this is what we see that's beautiful about our culture. This is what we see that we want. This is the potential. Well put. Well put.
Yeah.
No question there. You can just comment on that.
No, it's very beautifully put. It's this idea of a dialogue between cultures, between people. Especially, I think our children are well poised to have that dialogue and build on that in a way
Yeah.
that was very different for our previous generation. And brown people will outnumber. other
Yeah,
folks,
pretty soon.
It's like if you want to look at statistics and the next 25 years, there's it's going to be a change, a huge demographic shift. And so what does that mean in terms of race? What does it mean in terms of ethnicity? And what does it mean to be an American? I think will be a whole other thing 20 years from now. Yeah.
I do want to say New Jersey's not paid me to say this, but given how consciously the three of us think about life and identity and where we wanted to build roots with our kids, it's fascinating that the three of us have landed in New Jersey.
Isn't it? That's, yeah.
I think that part's really interesting. And then Ambreen's point, when she talked about even she couldn't get out in California, like out of her house because she had Punjabi parents, I was now reflecting and I was like, even though I was a boy, I grew up in Saudi Arabia and I didn't get out of the house as much as well. It was a very conservative place, but I consumed a lot of television and American television. And I think that led me to then be a storyteller and be expressive. And I think that's the power of the work, Afia, that you're doing now, which is a lot of sensitive, emotional people who think deeply about life and identity consume media and get influenced by what they're seeing, what they're observing. And that's the power of stories that all of us are telling in our work. This is why this is so important, and channeling all of our experiences and being able to authentically reflect that. I kind of wonder, what if we could consume your stories when I was a child, like Afia, the stories that you've told, or what if we could consume this podcast when we were children?
Yeah.
Like, what a different life we would have had to be accepted and to be seen that early. It just, and then I think about it and I'm like, my child's never going to watch this podcast, or nobody who's young is actually this. So then I'm like, but they're never going to watch. But it's kind of interesting, right? You're like, what?
But if they don't watch, it's because they don't need it. We need it, right? And so maybe they won't need it because the culture will have so much for them at that point. And to that point, I guess I would like to hear from you, Api, about this. So on the one hand, I think we're saying that storytelling is incredibly powerful and maybe our last hope for connecting with one another and understanding one another and, getting past this moment that's so polarizing. On the other hand, we're inundated with content, right? There's no shortage of content. This is not the days where everybody has seen the same blockbuster film. Like, everybody's watching their own thing. Do you feel like your work is diluted because of how much there's out there to consume now? Do you get concerned about that? Or are you more in the camp of like, this is an exciting moment where there's so many stories out there?
I think there is definitely the tyranny of choice now. If there's no one state-controlled channel, so you can, browse at will or choose at will or binge at will. And I hate using the word content, but that is what it is. But films and TV shows and media, the way we're consuming it now, it's like food, right? So what food choices do you prefer? I think that there will always be that meal that can be served to whatever your heart wants. And so I think having that in terms of choice is really helpful, and how audiences navigate and find what they want to look for. It's gonna be controlled by algorithms. So the more you watch, the more you will find out what is it that you need to watch, right? And so it's a whole other world we're living in, and with AI coming in, and our digital fingerprints all over all over the world. I honestly don't know what is the shape of things in the next 10 years of how we will watch things, because it seems to me that the attention spans of people is becoming less and less, especially the younger generation, right? The TikTokers, as we call them, this generation that's growing up on consuming these small bites of entertainment. And so what does that mean for people like myself who create content or films or TV shows or media? Like, what does it mean for us as artists to create something for a generation that is changing the way it views and absorbs something, So I feel like there is different ways and different kinds of things that can exist side by side, very much like, when early on in the history of filmmaking, if you remember the silent era, when films were made for the silent era and then sound came, people were so skeptical of it. People were like, oh my God, we're going to lose the integrity of what it means to make a film. Like, sound will distort the image. Sound will just remove the audience from the experience of when you hear the words being spoken. It's not going to be the same. Yes, things were not going to be the same, but things evolved, and sound and image became this one thing, and technology evolved after that. So technology will continue to evolve, and so how we adapt and change our viewing patterns and perception of how we consume things will change. And so in 20 years from now, I think there will be shorter and shorter content. Animation will be huge. AR, VR is out there. So virtual reality, we might be programming entire TV shows where you plug yourself into a headset and watch and maybe interact in that virtual realm, in a TV show. like, gaming, animation, all of that. I feel like there will be a collision of all the technology and different kinds of fields, and it will open up possibilities of how we tell stories and how we consume those stories. And so I'm very optimistic about the future. There will be ways to still make films like Oppenheimer. People will still want to watch something together in a collective experience inside a dark room. We will be welcomed into another world. Yes. So that experience, I think, will not go away anytime soon, but definitely our patterns of consuming will change, and our patterns of creating will also change.
So I'm gonna double down on Afia's optimistic note, and then Amreen, you can close us on a skeptical note if you'd like, or you can let us close on an optimistic note. Your call, Amreen. But I just want to say, connecting AI and our conversation today, Afia, that's what gives me hope about us. Like, your conversation, I was just so glued in. Like, I was more a listener than a host. Like, I was just like, tell me more, like, unravel the layers of your story. And no AI is going to have the kind of human experience and the multi-layered identity and the boxes and the not so boxes that you sort of lived in. And I feel like, I don't know if this is me maybe going too far, but there are certain stories that AI can write, and then there are certain stories that AI cannot.
Yeah.
And I think the experience of the marginalized, the experience of the outsiders like us, that AI can never write because it just doesn't have that data.
No, absolutely.
That's where there is so much power for us and this movement that we're having as brown storytellers to be able to tell the side of the story to the world, and that's future proof. Like, this is just such a human, authentic experience, and only.
Absolutely. I mean, these authentic stories, they are drawn from lived-in experiences. So the AI is not trained on any data. There's a whole other conversation of what kind of data these algorithms are trained on, and it's certainly not our stories, not our perspective, not our experiences. And so we have a kind of inroad into telling our original stories in an even more authentic way, because I think there will be a market for it, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not going to throw any water on that optimism.
No,
I also think that technology in general is allowing more people to become storytellers. Because
it is.
We're seeing animation is a great example, Afia. I see my kids consuming animated films from all over the world now, and they're being produced by different cultures because the barrier to producing them has become, lower. So that is an incredible opportunity. Yeah. I think maybe I want to end on a slightly different note, though, because we started talking about the bubbles that you grew up in Pakistan. And when you were saying that, I was thinking about how each of us have a Pakistan connection and a Pakistan story, and we each come from a different bubble of Pakistan. And I don't think that had we all stayed there, maybe our paths would have crossed, because through our creative interests or whatnot, through this moment, I think that cross-pollination is happening in Pakistan in a way that maybe it wasn't in the past. But certainly our families probably wouldn't have overlapped, I think. And I think we're in such a exciting moment that we can have this dialogue across the bubbles of Pakistan, and we can talk to one another about what this identity means to us and how we carry it with us when we're not there. I think all three of us share an incredible pride and love for what it means to be Pakistani. And so it's nice to kind of keep that alive among us as a community, isn't it?
It really is, it's so gratifying to hear about you, Ambreen, and Bilal, and your experiences as storytellers too, because this gives me hope as a Pakistani, especially that, our stories have these multidimensional facets that are being now experienced by new kinds of audiences, right? Your podcast is going to reach new kinds of audiences. Our work is going to reach new kinds of audiences, and what it means for us to represent our lives, our perspectives, As Pakistanis, I find that very refreshing and very inspiring also. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you. And just like person at Lums who thanked you for, kind of blazing that trail for his community, I want to say the same thing to you. I am certain that you will kind of blaze more and more trails in your career, but even what you've achieved so far, you're setting such a role model for me, for my daughters, for me to say, look, this is all that's possible, So I really appreciate the work you do. And I know it's not easy to keep pushing yourself as a creator.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that space and having me. Yeah.